All right, Jim, it's 11 a.m. Pacific Standard Time, and you are a busy guy. So I,
Yes.
I don't want I don't want us to waste any time diving into it. Welcome to our weekly coaching call. Thank you so much for being part of it.
Yeah, thanks, Suzanne. I'm really excited to be here. Uh, I'm going to be talking about bootstrapping a successful SaaS business. What's the approach that you want to take here? Do you want to kind of kick things off and I'll just launch into the presentation?
Yeah, let me, for those of you who are joining us for the first time, right? This coaching call is an invitation that we strive to put out weekly to folks, right? So what we do at the Development Factory is we try to build better digital products better. And we recognize that if you're new in the space, if you haven't had an opportunity to participate as part of a product team or launch your own sort of dream idea, then you might not know where to begin. Sometimes people think that where they should begin is just hiring a developer. And that's not always the best way to just dive into a project. So coaching calls in general are a way of giving back to the community, sharing lessons learned, both that we've learned here internally on our team, but also sharing the expertise of folks like Jim Semick here, who's our special guest today. So why I wanted Jim on this particular coaching call is the story of ProductPlan. And for those of you who don't know, ProductPlan is a road mapping software tool. The story of ProductPlan is it's a success story, right? Spoiler alert, it's a success story. But it's not a story that didn't come without hard work and specific types of choices and trade-offs. And so I think what Jim's here to talk about is what it means to go down the road of building out a product business. Maybe we'll touch a little bit on, where you have to find experience or draw down expertise. And we're going to be asking some great questions along the way. But beyond that, Jim, this is your show, so you run it.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. My name is Jim Semick, and I've been a new product development product manager for about 15 years now. I've been part of several successful companies with successful exits. I was the original product manager behind the products out of Citrix called GoToMeeting and GoToMyPC, and helped define those products and validate those products. Later, I was an early team member over at Appfolio, and that's a company that is a B2B SaaS company, and that company went public a couple of years ago. And I had, along the way, had a desire to build my own product. Like a lot of product managers, they have desires to be entrepreneurs. I see that quite frequently. I don't know, Suzanne, if you've seen that, but a lot of product managers have that itch. And I did too. And I've in the past had other companies that were more like consulting companies. And I really wanted to build a product. And based on my experience with B2B SaaS, I decided to launch my own company, but I didn't know where to start. I really had a desire to do it, but didn't really know like where to begin. I had a lot of great ideas, but I didn't know which one to choose. So I'm going to talk about that journey a little bit. The company that we ultimately created is called ProductPlan. It's a B2B SaaS company. As Suzanne said, we build product roadmap software, and our target market is product managers, often digital product managers for companies that are building digital products, software products for consumers or businesses. But we also find that our product is getting great traction with companies that you wouldn't consider to be digital companies. Companies like Marriott Hotels is a customer of ours. The BBC, as I mentioned, Intuit, to help communicate their strategy of what they're building to their stakeholders and executives. We're based here out of Santa Barbara, California. I've lived here for a number of years, and it's a small town, but it has a really great tech ecosystem. And the company was started in 2013, and as this talk is about, we did not take outside funding, and that was a deliberate choice that we made. And today we have thousands of customers all around the world using our product to communicate their strategy. And so we're really, really excited about how the opportunity that we originally validated turned out to be bigger than we expected. And it's also being used by many more vertical markets than we expected. So it's even though it didn't quite match our expectations, it was in the good sense. And we just think that we're just getting started with the product. So a little bit about our journey. And when I say we, I have a co-founder. His name is Greg. And I originally started working with Greg after I brought some business ideas to the table because I wanted to start a company. And Greg and I got to talking about these different ideas and realized that we wanted to start a company together. And we came to that conclusion because Greg and I, we spent a lot of time paddleboarding. Those are our paddleboards there, and hiking and having beer and really talking a lot about what we wanted. So that was really the first step of the company. Rather than starting with an idea and something that's been stewing for a long time, we first agreed on what we wanted to achieve with the business. What kind of business do we want? For example, we decided very early on that we wanted it to be a B2B SaaS company because both of us have experience with B2B SaaS. And so that comes naturally to us. We also talked quite a bit about how big do we want the company to be? What sort of exit do we want to have? What do we want our life to look like? What sort of values do we share with building a business? So that was really the first step. And then we started brainstorming more ideas and began to validate those ideas to figure out the best problem and solution, the best product that fit the model and the goals that we wanted. So it's a little bit different than a lot of companies that launch a product where they start with a product first and then aren't quite sure where it's going to take them. It could be a small business or maybe it can IPO. And we deliberately set up front what kind of company that we wanted, that we did not want venture funding and we didn't want to IPO. So it was only after that validation process and the discussion about our values, it was then that we began to code the product. And I'll talk about that process a little later on. So a little bit about the customer development process that we used. So I used and have used for the products that I've launched, including GoToMeeting and products like that, a very regimented customer discovery process. And it really starts with discovery interviews to understand pain. And that's really where you want to focus your time in the very beginning. It's not about getting feedback about a product early on. It's really about, I don't quite know what the solution is, but I want to find the pain to solve. So you have to learn about the pain. You have to learn about the value of solving that pain. And then once you discover that, then it's easier to get customers to buy your product. Once you really validate that you're reducing pain that they have, or maybe creating gain. You're either helping them make more money or save time, that sort of thing. So what we do is we come up with these assumptions. After we really understand the problem space well and a specific target that we're approaching, we then test those assumptions with real people. And so we did a lot of different tests. We did cold calling to product managers. We set up landing pages to attract them to a potential solution even before we had coded anything. And then we also want to test the acquisition model and acquisition cost. Because this, in my experience, is a failure point for a lot of startups, that you can have a fantastic product, but if you can't get customers to find your product or you find them cost effectively, then it's not going to work. The model is not going to work. So we needed to understand that well enough. So we interviewed over 30 product managers before we began coding the product. And then by the time we launched a few months later, we had interviewed 70 different product managers. And this has so many benefits, especially for a bootstrapped company. And I'll talk a little more about this, but the main objective here is that you want to reduce risk as much as possible, because if you're bootstrapping, you're resource constrained, you're spending your own money, and you don't have the opportunity to get it wrong. You don't have a second chance. And so you really want to get the product, you want to nail the product out of the gate and have customers waiting to buy the product before you launch. And so I think that that's a process I've used before, even with venture funded companies, and it's so important for bootstrapped companies. So,
Hey Jim, before you continue
yeah.
on to the next chapter, I want to just ask you about that exact point of talking to customers when you don't yet have a product. Sorry, there's an echo there? Can you hear me a little better?
Sure.
Talking to customers when you don't yet have a product. So one of the things that we see a lot, especially with first-time founders, is what I call like feature fear. And it's that as long as the product is still in development, I don't actually have to worry about putting it out. And this is precisely the time when we say, you need to be out talking to customers. You need to be selling your product now. They don't want to sell when they don't have something. But you just shared that you talked to another 40 or 50 product managers even while your product wasn't available. Could you just tell us a little bit about that experience?
Yeah, absolutely. So the process starts with really bad mock-ups. And so Greg and I, at that point, we don't have the luxury and we don't have the funding to hire a designer or a UX person. And so we're doing it all ourselves. And this is one of the downsides of bootstrapping, is that you're putting things in front of potential customers that you may not be proud of. I think that's a good thing. I think it's if you're waiting until you have the right design, if you're waiting to like really know in advance which features you're going to have, you're probably too late in the game. So I feel that it's really important to have maybe no sense of shame. We did mock-ups in Keynote and put those in front of prospective customers. And then through the process, as we began to develop it, we could put more refined prototypes in front of them, or even show them some of the demos that we have. And the thing that I think is really important here is that customers and prospects will forgive you if you are potentially solving a problem for them. So it doesn't need to look great. All you need to do is help them understand the vision of where you're going, and then some specifics around it, like it's going to have this feature, but not this feature. And people will be very forgiving as long as you are solving a problem for them. And so that process was, it was before we began coding, and as part of the validation process, we put some pretty bad mock-ups in front of people. And iterated along the way. We would begin to hear feedback, and then we start to do pattern recognition and say, oh, so it needs to do this and not that. And that those became more refined along the way.
That's great, Jim. Thank you so much.
Yeah. So a little bit about why we decided to bootstrap. And this was a decision that we made very early on. Some startups, they go into it and they say, well, if we can get funding, that would be great. And they spend quite a bit of time talking with angel investors, doing pitches, and trying to get introductions to VCs and so on. And we decided to skip that altogether, even though Greg and I have had the capability and the resources to get funding. Because of our track record, we decided to forego that at the very beginning because it has a lot of benefits. And the benefits are that when you take funding, especially funding from VCs, you are now tied to their goals rather than your goals. So when you take funding, a VC, for example, expects an exit. So you are now predestined to sell your company or IPO. So that is a foregone conclusion. And they're going to expect that within a certain number of years. They also expect a large return. So they're looking on a 10 times return on their money. So if you are taking their money, you are now tied to their expectation about growth. And if you don't have the capability of becoming a $50 million company or a $100 million company or a $1 billion company, then you have mismatched expectations, and your investors are not going to be happy with that. And there are a lot of stories out there where a founder takes funding and the company doesn't grow the way that they expect. And now the founder is booted out of their own company. So they take control of your own baby. And the upside of bootstrapping is that it eliminates all of that. As long as my co-founder and I are on the same page about what we expect from the company in terms of growth and an exit, then we're fine. And then the other benefit, of course, is that when you take funding, you're giving away equity of your company. It's not uncommon for founders at the end of a few funding rounds to be left with 15 or 20% of their company. And if you have multiple co-founders, right, that equity is now split. So, and so we can retain all of the equity for ourselves. Now, of course, we are in some cases, granting equity to employees and other key people that have helped us along the way. But we retain the bulk of that equity and the control of the company as well, so the decisions are ours. And even during the day-to-day operations, we're making all the decisions ourselves. And a board member and an investor often can bring expertise to the table. So I'm not discounting that. And a lot of companies require that. A lot of companies require that outside expertise. And certainly there are times when we wish for decisions that we had outside people, but we actually, through our network, can have access to a lot of really great mentors and experts that can help us along the way. But because Greg and I have done this before, we feel that a lot of these decisions that maybe first-time founders would make mistakes with, that we're okay making those decisions ourselves. And then the other benefit is that it helps us focus. Unlike other founders who go out and try to raise capital, those founders are spending all of their time raising capital. They're spending all of their time doing investor pitches, traveling, and so on. So instead of doing all of that, we can focus on building a great product, making customers happy, acquiring customers, promoting our product, doing webinars, and that sort of thing, rather than giving investor updates and preparing for board meetings and so on. So there are a lot of benefits to bootstrapping, but I will say that there are a lot of trade-offs, and you're going to see that this slide is slightly bigger than the other side with pros. But I'm still very, very happy that we've made the decision that we've made. So one of the first trade-offs is that because you're resource constrained, you're using your own money. You can't hire for all the positions that you want. We had to be extremely creative with our first developer in order to get that person on board developing our product that would become our MVP. So we needed to be very scrappy and creative. Now, a company that received a large angel round or a Series A, they can go out and they can hire 10 engineers right off the bat to build their product. The downside of doing that is that you may not have the product right. So you're spending a lot of money doing that. You're spending, in the case of 10 engineers, you're spending, $1.5 million your first year to build that product. The other downside is that you need to be ready to risk your own personal capital. You're putting your own money on the table. And, there are a lot of downsides to that, especially if you have a mortgage or a family. And in my case, I have kids. And so there's a tremendous amount of stress that goes along with that. If I were risking other people's money, I wouldn't have been as stressed out as I was. Another downside is that, I think I mentioned this before, you don't have the luxury of a second go around. If you get it wrong, then you are out of business. So your product has to be right the first time. And I'm not saying that you can't do some slight pivots along the way. And you certainly need to start with an MVP product that solves a problem. And so you don't have the luxury of building the product that has everything under the sun. But that first product that you build has to be right the first time. The other compromise is that you need to be in a position to take either no salary, like we did, or a very sub-market salary for years. And that, again, is a decision that we've made. Now, there are companies that start out bootstrapped, and then they get a funding round, and then the founders and other key executives can now start to take a somewhat market level salary for their expertise. That's a decision that they make. And when you bootstrap, you really have to be prepared for a long time to take a sub-market salary or no salary. And in my case, part of my early, when I was figuring out the business and figuring out which idea I wanted to do, I was consulting on the side in order to keep money coming in. And so that's a compromise that you make. And if we had taken funding, we would have had the luxury of getting maybe not a market salary, but certainly some salary for a period of time. And all of that, the stress that it causes, the low salary, and the amount of time that you need to put in can cause strain on your personal life. This is not to be discounted. You need to be able to, when you go home to your family or your friends, to be able to set aside the business for a time to be able to focus on that. It's both a pro and a con to be so incredibly focused and passionate on what you're building. And I love it. I love the amount of focus and waking up early in the morning and being excited about what you're doing. And also stretching yourself. I think that's a very important skill, to be able to stretch your own skills. But it does cause strain. The other thing is that with a bootstrap company, all the revenue that you make needs to be reinvested into making a better product and customer acquisition. And so that's what we've done this whole time. Now our company is now cash flow positive, and we're growing nicely. But all of that revenue we're taking and we're reinvesting it into the product even today. And so as a result, certainly our first office was not glamorous. It was a small 10 by 10 office that smelled a little bit moldy, and it was far away from town in a very unsexy part of town. And those are the trade-offs that you have to make when you get our first desk was an old dining room table that I had. And so you are making these conscious decisions about expenses. And if we were venture funded, well, things might be a little bit different. We might have had a sexier office. We might have been able to go out and buy new office chairs to begin with. You're making those trade-offs, which at the end of the day, I don't think those are really important. The really important thing is about building a great product, having fun doing it, making customers really excited and delighted about the problems that you're solving for them. And then finally, this is a lot of hard work. You don't have the ability to hire people for every role. You need to be able to be, in my case, I'm still putting together desks. I'm still the guy that orders snacks for the office, right? But beyond that, you need to stretch your skills. I don't have, for example, a sales background, yet I'm running a sales team. And I need to be able to stretch my skills to be able to understand that domain really well, to run it effectively and continue to grow the business. And so your skills get stretched in all these different directions. You need to be able to understand finance. You need to be able to understand sales, development, and so on. And you don't have the luxury of being able to say, okay, well, we'll hire for that. And then the other thing is that even at the beginning, you need to be realistic about the outcomes. So we, at the front, at the very beginning, said we do not want to have a company or manage a company that's going to be in growth mode for an IPO. That was an expectation that we set very early up front. And you need to be realistic about those outcomes. Now, we are building a great company. We'll soon be approaching 30 people. We're growing quickly. Our customers and revenues are doubling every year. So we are a fast growing software company. And it's going to be, it is, I believe, successful today. But if we were venture funded and we took several billions of revenue, that outcome that we eventually will have will be very different. And as I said, we're not going to IPO. So any questions, Suzanne, about these trade-offs or about the benefits? And are there any questions from the audience here?
There's a couple of questions, but selfishly, I want to take lead on another one because I think that this might also open up some ideas for the folks listening in. So a B2B product, I think, presents an interesting use case in that you don't necessarily have a high volume of customers. I mean, you all are fortunate. You've got customers sort of into the thousands, but it's very different from, say, a Facebook, right, which has customers into the hundreds of millions.
Yeah.
And when you have that, it really sets up the distinction between creating customer value and creating user value. So as an example, you've got a client, they might have one person that makes the decision, okay, we're using ProductPlan, and then 1,000 people within the organization that need to kind of get onboarded. Can you speak a little bit about that from how you sell a product in effectively and where you balance your energy?
Yeah, absolutely. One of the reasons I believe that we're able to create a successful bootstrapped SaaS company is because we chose a B2B model. And in B2C, as you mentioned, you need volume there. And in a lot of markets and platforms, think like a Facebook, right? You need to have significant volume in order to monetize that platform. And that requires a lot of capital, because it's not as if people are in, certainly it happens, but it most often it doesn't, where you build it and they come, right? It's never going to be like that. So you need to figure out a way to attract people to your platform in a B2C model, and that costs money. So choosing a B2B company was a great choice for us, because one, we were familiar with the model, and two, you can get revenue very early on with a limited number of customers. And so those first customers, I could pick up the phone, I can reach the right person who's the decision maker. We can do a demo of the product, and they will buy the product and they will cut us a check for their first year. So that through that model, you can, even though it's low volume, you can fund a company. And so that's part of the decision making. Now, certainly there are B2C companies and e-commerce companies that you can bootstrap, right? So I can set up fulfillment by Amazon, for example, and with fairly low capital start an e-commerce company. And so there are certainly consumer related businesses that I can start that can be bootstrapped. But in my experience, if we want to grow to, many millions of dollars of revenue, and we want to do it in a bootstrapped way, the B2B model is fantastic. And I personally believe that SaaS for businesses, we're still very early. And so there is a lot of opportunity there. It may not be sexy, right? There are, in some of these markets, these are vertical markets that are in markets that, are a little bit old school, and they're not quite the sexy things that you read about on TechCrunch. But I think there is a lot of opportunity.
That's great, Jim. I have a question, Jim, around the mix of consulting and the amount of time that you were able to focus on your company in the beginning. It sounded like this went on for a couple of years before you were able to kind of really focus on ProductPlan full time. Yeah. Walk us through your process of how you mixed consulting and what some of those trade-offs were and how that all worked.
Yeah, sure. So it was a little over a year that I consulted. My expertise is in market validation, which is a very market validation for new software products. And so it's a very, very specialized skill that I have. So I was able to consult based on that. So it wound up being me consulting about half-time, and then more than half-time building the business. And so it was me waking up at 4:30 every morning and working on this thing, working on all aspects of the business, trying to figure out, doing market research, trying to understand who to contact for market validation, working on mock-ups, working on the landing page. The landing page I put together at 10 o'clock at night. It took me a couple of hours. And so you have to be able to have that sort of flexibility in your life. And software is wonderful for that, because I can put the kids to bed and then I can go back to work. And luckily it's not like that anymore. I can have a life and travel but in the beginning it has to be, consulting for, X number of hours, which could be 20 hours a week. And then the rest of the time, another 40 or 50 hours or whatever that number is, building the business. So you need to have that sort of flexibility. After we were ready to go live, I entered the first customer credit card to pay for the product, and I still wasn't sure if it would work. And that was done at 10 o'clock at night. That was a very exciting time, and I look back on that very fondly. All those really early mornings and late nights, I look back on all of that very fondly, because it was a very exciting time. Because even at that moment where someone said they would buy, and we weren't 100% sure that everything would work, all the pieces would work. There's a thrill to that, and I wouldn't trade that for anything.
That's a great answer. Yeah, thanks.
I have a question from Rita in our audience, and this takes us back to the customer development process that you described earlier in the conversation. So, the question is, how do you craft questions to identify the true pain of the customer?
That's a great question. So I like to ask open-ended questions. So during this discovery process, you go in with a few questions that you want them to answer. Those have to be open-ended questions, in my opinion. You can't go in with a survey. A survey, basically it's preordained that you already know what the questions are to ask. And I feel that it is those initial questions that you ask are really opening the door to things that you haven't thought of. And so I like to ask questions around things like, if you had a successful year, what does that look like? So that's a big open-ended question. And then you can start to narrow down, well, this person for their role is being evaluated on this criteria, on these three things. Well, how can you build a product that might help them achieve those goals? And so you can go down that path. And I like to ask questions around what their day looks like. So let's walk through your day. What do you do in a typical day? What are the frustrations that you have with your day? What are the things that really get you irritated? And so that's a good way of uncovering pain. I also, if you are looking to displace an existing solution, it's great to ask a lot of questions around that, and asking questions around pain and frustration around that existing product. So once you go down that path, then you can start to ask questions around, well, how important is it to you to solve that problem? Where does this fall in your priorities list? And then you can actually go down the path of calculating the return on investment for solving that problem. How much time would you save? How much more money would you or your company make by solving that problem? And so these are all very open-ended questions. And so if you go down that path, you can start to narrow in on a big enough problem to solve. The other mistake that I see first-time founders make is that they think that their product is great for everyone. Anyone can use this, is what I hear. And I think that's a mistake. I think it's really important, especially early on, to get as focused as you can on the target market or the customer segment and the persona. So we initially started by talking to product managers at mid-sized software companies, right? So that's a very specific persona. And if we said our product is, well, it could be used by any company, or if we said, well, mid-sized companies, but used by any persona, marketers, product managers, project managers, and so on, we would have been chasing down a solution, and we might have gone down a different path. or built a product that was so watered down and weak that it isn't great. And what our product does is it solves a couple of key problems really well for a specific persona. And I think that's really important, especially for bootstrapping, is to get as narrow as you can in targeting a specific persona. Yeah, and you're going to hear a train go by here now because we're not in a glamorous part of town.
The true underbelly of a SaaS business, bootstrapped.
Yeah.
We have another question here from Clay in our audience who's asking again about the customer research piece, but specifically regarding the pricing model. So a couple of components to this question. How much of the customer research was focused on the pricing model? And have you iterated significantly on your pricing model over the years? And if so, were people mad about it?
Yeah, absolutely. Those are great questions. In fact, we just conducted a webinar around SaaS pricing, but in our validation and customer development, pricing was a very important part of it. If you can't begin to narrow down and get close on your revenue model early on, and say, well, it's okay, we'll figure out how much to charge and we'll figure out what the model is later, I think you're setting yourself up for either a failure or needing to pivot. And so the pricing and the validation around the pricing was a very important part of our validation. And so I see the validation as an evolution. So you initially start off by just understanding the problem. And then you start to propose solutions to the problem. And then that iterates over a period of time and interviews. And then as you get closer to what you think might be the final MVP, then you start floating trial balloons for pricing. And you can say, we have this product that solves these problems, and hopefully you're getting agreement on those problems, right? The customer is nodding their head and saying yes. And then you begin to float trial balloons. Well, if this product were X amount per month, would you buy this product? And the dangerous part is that people aren't absolutely committing to it. So you need to ask follow-up questions and say, if they say, yes, I would pay $29 a month for that. Then you begin to say, oh, okay, would you put it on your credit card or would you put it on a company card? Who else would need to be involved in that decision? Do you need to get it approved? Those sorts of things. Would you do it for 1 month? Would you need to sign up for a year? Those sorts of questions. And you can begin to, through a period of interviews, begin to refine that process. And then to answer your second question, yes, we've iterated the price several times since we launched. So we had our initial price, then we adjusted the price, and then we've had 2 pricing changes since then. In fact, just a month and a half ago, we increased prices by about 20%. But what we've done is we've taken the approach of grandfathering in those initial customers at the price that they bought. So they can buy additional licenses at that old price. There's some debate about whether that's the right thing to do, but we've decided to take that approach, especially for our earliest customers, because they took a chance on us. But now we just increased prices, and it's not our last price increase. It's important to revisit your pricing regularly, especially with a SaaS business.
Another question for you, Jim, but before I ask it, I just want to be mindful. Did you have additional slides? I know we just kind of started into this ad hoc QA here.
Yeah. Why don't we do this? Why don't I spend about 2 or 3 minutes and power through the rest of the slides? I have some takeaways and just five key lessons that I've learned, and then we can go to Q&A.
Okay, awesome. Thank you.
Yeah, you bet. So the first lesson is find a great co-founder. Greg is fantastic. We share the same values and goals. And I mean by values, I mean values for building a company and the culture that we want to create. And then we also have personal values about treating people right. We want our employees to find ProductPlan to be a great place to work, where their career goals, they're supported, are supported. And so it's those sorts of things. And I think it's really important to find a co-founder with the same thought. The other thing that I alluded to is you really don't start building your product until you find a big enough problem to solve. And big is relative. What I mean by big is that it's big in your customer's mind. So, so you can find a limited number of people with this big problem and still build a successful company. And then once you validate that problem, you move as fast as you can. You don't have the luxury as a bootstrap company to spend, a year developing your product. You need to get it out the door as fast as you can. For us, it took 5 months to get to our first paying customer. And then once you find product market fit, once you believe that you have a company that a sales model that is repeatable and that this thing can scale, then you invest heavily in customer acquisition. You don't go out and buy and rent the nice office. You take every penny you have and you invest it in customer acquisition. And for us, it's building and writing great content. It's AdWords and other approaches for customer acquisition. And then finally, you want to make sure that employees are on the same page with the kind of company that you're building. If there are employees out there that they look for a company that's going to IPO, right? They want that big win. And you also want to find employees that are okay with wearing a lot of different hats. So it's not only the founders that have to do a lot that is not in the job description. You need to find employees that have a similar mindset. So you want to find employees with broad skills that are okay with uncertainty and are okay with things changing and not having a handbook, a playbook to go to. So I think that's really important. And now we can go to questions.
All right, well, I'll give the folks in the audience a couple minutes here to submit your questions either through the chat window or down in the Q&A module if you've still got some questions that you'd like Jim to speak to while we've got him for a few more minutes. But I want to go back to another point that you brought up earlier, and it's related to business building, but on the softer side. So you talked about, not having much money and needing to kind of wrangle a developer early on. And you went on to talk about not having the sexy offices and all of those things. What advice could you offer somebody who's in a similar situation? They're starting up, they don't look good on paper, so to speak, to attract good talent to buy into the vision, especially when down the road somebody's offering M&Ms and ping pong and all that cool stuff, right?
Yeah, that's a great question. That's something that we wrestle with fairly regularly, because it is true that developers especially are in demand, and there are a lot of companies in our area, in the Bay Area and elsewhere, that are recruiting and paying premiums for it and offering, free food and kegerators and all of this. And so my advice is to be very creative. So you want to find the right people that are looking for an opportunity like this. So we've been fortunate that several of the people that we've hired, they've come from the University of California in Santa Barbara here, and they've taken the technology management program here, and they are looking to one day be entrepreneurs themselves. And I think that's wonderful, because they can get a behind the scenes look at how a company is started and run. And that's a unique opportunity that you don't get at the big companies that have shuttle buses and a campus and all of those luxuries. Because you're in those businesses, you're being pigeonholed is the right word, but you're siloed, right? And you can't see all parts of the business. And for some people, it's a really good thing to be able to see all of the decisions that are being made and to be able to stretch themselves and say, well, I'm in customer success now, and but I really would like to learn about this part of the business. And we can give people those opportunities. And so the other thing is at the very early stage, you can be really creative about how you pay people and the type of people that you get. So their resumes may not be the ideal resume, right? So you want to get people that don't quite fit the mold or the model that those big companies, those big attractive companies are looking for. And so these people might have great skills, right? Or the right attitude. And so we can work with them and be creative about compensation and equity and working hours. Remote work is another one. There are a lot of companies that won't allow remote work. We do. So, so you can be really creative about how you can attract people and build a company that way.
So we've got two more questions here, and one is a follow-up, I think, to what you were just speaking about. Is there a specific way in which you can go about communicating kind of the vision and the values of the business? Is this, do you document it? Do you have it on a one sheet? Do you just tell everybody who comes to the office and hope they retain it?
Yeah, that's a great question. We have talked a lot about the culture that we want to create and the values that we share. And it's only recently that we formalized that. And we formalized it in a series of bullet points about what we believe to be our values. For example, we recognize that people want a balanced lifestyle, and so that informs what we do as a company as well. It informs the activities that we have, and we have outdoor days, for example, those sorts of things. And so we try to embody those values that we have. And I think it's important that people understand those, and they also understand what the outcome is for the company. When I interview people, they often ask, okay, where is ProductPlan going? And I think it's important for them to know that we're not going to IPO, right? And that's attractive to people, and that might not be their expectation. That they might want to work for a company that will be, a fast-moving, publicly traded company with thousands of employees.
I do have one more, but I thought, Brett, that I heard you were wanting to weigh in. Were you wanting to weigh in?
I definitely have a question around, you've mentioned this a couple of times around equity for your employees, the people inside of your organization. And I love the bootstrapping model, and I talk with a lot of people that are starting to bootstrap. Maybe they're going to raise later on, but they hand out equity to some of the early people on their team. And part of my understanding with equity is that we need a way to recoup that cost later on. As an employee inside of an organization, there needs to be some sort of liquidity event. And I'm curious what you're designing inside of your organization to help employees and even yourself and your co-founder to realize some of that gain over time. What are you thinking there?
Yeah, that's a great question. So the way that a bootstrap company exits is primarily through an acquisition. And so that is probably an eventuality for us. I can't tell you when it's going to happen because right now we're having a whole lot of fun and we're growing the company, and our employees know that. So with that equity, there's vesting along with it. So we have the standard 4-year vesting schedule, but they know that, and they have an understanding of what that means. So yeah, I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, it certainly does.
And it sets us up for a final question asked from Andrew here on our audience, and maybe you spoke to it, I don't know. He says, when do you think you will be, and he puts this in quotes, done with the company, right? What does success look like for you, I guess, retrospectively?
Yeah, well, first of all, done with the product is never. There is so much opportunity for us, and we feel that we can't move fast enough with fulfilling the vision for the product itself. And so our roadmap, we know fairly clearly what we need to do to accomplish in the short term here on our roadmap. in terms of the company, when am I done? Like I said, I'm having a great time right now, and we're focused on growing the company, and that itself is really fun, and I don't see that slowing down. So I haven't really thought about what done for me is personally. And certainly I have, certainly I'd love to have, a balanced lifestyle and travel and continue to expand my skill set. Yeah, I don't know if there's a done. I don't know.
It's never done. That should have been the name of this webinar.
Yeah.
Never done.
Yeah.
Okay, listen, Jim Semick, you are just the best guy, by the way.
Oh, thank you.
Nice to see your smiling, shining face. And we're super grateful that you made time out of your busy schedule to come and share some wisdom. For those of you who joined us today, thank you so much for participating. As I said earlier, these coaching calls are an opportunity to give back to the community of entrepreneurs and builders and just people who want to give it a try and maybe try to minimize some of the mistakes. And so, I think hearing, Jim, from the mistakes that you've made, thank you for making them so that everyone in the audience doesn't have to. We all appreciate you for that. First of all, if people want to get in touch with you or learn more about ProductPlan, tell us a little bit about how they can do that.
Yeah, absolutely. So if you are a product manager or an aspiring product manager or building products as an entrepreneur, we have a great blog. And so Suzanne's content is great. We also have a lot of content around building products at productplan.com. So you can find our blog and subscribe there. You're also welcome to connect with me on LinkedIn. So just look for Jim Semick and you'll find me.
Cool. So those of you in the audience, get in touch with Jim if you've got more questions. If you have more questions for us at the Development Factory about how to build better products better, we want to hear from you. So you can email Suzanne at thedevelopmentfactory.com or Brett at thedevelopmentfactory.com, set up a conversation, and we'll be happy to discuss. Jim, I guess it's too early for wine drinking in Santa Barbara. What time does that start, by the way?
We're not going to talk about it.
Maybe it's not too early after all. Okay, everyone, go get yourselves a glass of wine. Thanks for coming out, and we'll talk to you all again real soon. Thank you, Jim.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye
Thanks,
now.
Jim. Bye.